I used to think I was good at pretending things didn't matter. Turns out, I was only good at saying it out loud. The first time I met her, it was a Wednesday, gray sky, faint smell of rain, and the sound of metal tools clattering against the counter. I worked part-time at a small repair shop downtown, fixing everything from coffee machines to wristwatches people swore had sentimental value. She brought in a radio, one of those heavy, old ones with wooden sides and a faded dial. "It hums but doesn't speak," she said. Her voice had this low, composed tone, like someone who didn't rush words because she didn't have to. She looked mid-40s, maybe a little older. Dark hair tied back loosely, a few silver strands she didn't bother to hide. The kind of presence that made silence feel comfortable, but also charged, like a storm hovering without breaking. I remember nodding too quickly. "I can take a look." Probably just a loose wire. Her smile was small but exact. "It's been through worse." She left it on the counter and lingered for a second longer than she needed to, fingers grazing the edge of the table before she stepped back. It was nothing, but something. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the door closed behind her. For the next few days, I kept thinking about that radio. I fixed it twice. The first time because it buzzed, the second because I wanted an excuse to keep it a little longer. I told myself I was testing the sound quality, but truthfully, I just wanted to hear what kind of songs someone like her listened to. When she returned, the shop was nearly empty. She wore a beige coat, damp at the shoulders from the drizzle. She smelled faintly of rain and coffee. I wiped my hands on a rag, pretending to be busy. "Did it survive?" she asked. "It sings again," I said, and instantly regretted how stupid that sounded. She laughed softly, not mocking, just amused. "Good. I missed the noise." She didn't leave right away this time. She leaned against the counter, looking around the cramped shop like she was memorizing it. "You're here most days?" "Pretty much. My uncle owns the place. I'm, studying electronics, so this helps." She nodded. "You're good with details. I noticed that last time." Something about the way she said it, the way her eyes stayed on me a second too long, made my chest tighten. Not attraction exactly. Not yet. Just attention. The kind that feels dangerous when you haven't earned it. I handed her the radio, careful not to touch her fingers, but still felt the ghost of warmth where they almost met. She took it, hesitated, and said, "You didn't charge enough." "I fixed what was broken," I said. "That's all." Her lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in something closer to understanding. Then she nodded and turned to leave. Before the door closed, she glanced back. "Thank you, Liam." She remembered my name. I hadn't told her this time. That night, I sat on my apartment floor, the rain still tapping the window. I kept hearing her voice, low, steady, deliberate, the kind of voice that stayed in the air even after it was gone. I told myself it was nothing, just a nice moment, just friendship. But the truth, the one I wouldn't admit even to the empty room, was that I replayed the look she gave me, that faint, knowing smile. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it felt like a beginning. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It had been almost 2 weeks before I saw her again. I told myself I'd stop thinking about her, that the radio was just another job. But when the shop bell chimed one slow afternoon and she walked in, a quiet part of me gave up pretending. She carried a folder under her arm and looked different. The same calmness, the same poise, but a tiredness, too. A faint crease near her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I think I broke something again," she said. This time, it was a small desk lamp. "It flickers. Can you take a look?" I nodded, maybe too quickly. "Sure. Might be the wiring." She smiled, polite, distant. "That's what you said last time." I set the lamp on the counter, unscrewed the top, and tried not to notice how she stood. Close enough for me to smell her perfume, something faint and earthy, like sandalwood and old paper. Her hands rested on the edge of the counter, fingers tapping once, twice, like she was working something out in her head. "You always fix things," she said softly. "Doesn't that get tiring?" I glanced up. Her eyes met mine, gray, steady, but softer now, vulnerable in a way that didn't fit her composure. "Not really," I said. "Sometimes it's easier to fix things than people." The words slipped out before I could stop them. She exhaled, a small, private sound, then looked down, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "People," she said quietly. "Yes, they're harder." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The lamp's metal base reflected the light, and her reflection trembled faintly in it, like the world couldn't decide if it wanted to hold her still. She broke the silence first. My son used to fix things. Little things. Toys, mostly. Her voice wavered, barely noticeable. He'd get impatient when something wouldn't fit. I paused my work. Does he still? No, she said simply. Then, after a beat, he's not a child anymore. And life doesn't leave much room for patience. Something in me wanted to ask more, but I didn't. Instead, I handed her the fixed lamp, fingers brushing hers this time. Not by accident. She didn't pull away, just looked down at our hands, then back at me, her expression unreadable. Thank you, she murmured, voice low, careful. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the quiet that followed, but the words caught in my throat. She gathered the lamp, pressed a hand briefly to the side of her neck like she needed grounding, then turned toward the door. As she reached it, she hesitated. That same pause as last time. You're good at noticing things, Liam. Be careful with that. And then she was gone again. That night, I caught myself replaying the sound of her voice when she said my name. Not the words, just the tone, like she was warning me and wanting me to ignore it all at once. I knew I shouldn't think of her like that, but it was already too late. The pull was too gentle to resist, too human to stop. The rain had been falling since noon, relentless and patient. By closing time, the street outside looked washed out, streaks of light smearing across puddles like half-remembered dreams. She was still there. Her car wouldn't start, and she'd come back into the shop, shaking droplets from her coat. I'm not great with engines, she'd admitted, laughing under her breath. Seems I have a habit of things breaking around me. We waited for the rain to ease. I made her tea, the kind we keep for customers, too strong and a little bitter, and we sat among the half-fixed clocks and open drawers. The air smelled faintly of dust and metal. She looked around the shop the way people look at old photographs. You ever think about leaving? She asked suddenly. Doing something else? I shrugged. Sometimes. But I like it here. There's something honest about it. Honest, she repeated, as if tasting the word. That's rare. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like both of us were standing at the edge of something we couldn't name. I wanted to ask what she meant, why her eyes looked distant, almost guilty. Instead, I said, you look tired. She smiled faintly. You noticed too much. I almost told her that it wasn't on purpose, that noticing her had become a kind of instinct. But then her phone buzzed. She checked the screen, exhaled through her nose, and silenced it without answering. Everything okay? I asked. It's complicated, she said. Then, after a pause, he doesn't take endings well. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The way her thumb lingered over the phone was explanation enough. The rain thickened again, tapping harder against the windows. She leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. A strand of hair fell across her cheek. I had this sudden, absurd urge to brush it away, not out of romance, but out of something quieter, needier. Connection. I didn't move. She opened her eyes, catching me looking at her. Neither of us looked away. Sometimes, she said, voice barely above a whisper, you meet someone at the wrong time. My breath hitched. Maybe time isn't the problem. The words hung there, raw, stupid, true. Her lips parted, but before she could respond, the shop lights flickered. A transformer outside groaned under the storm, and we both laughed, too quickly, like we needed the noise to break whatever was building. Her laughter, soft, breathy, turned into silence again. She stood, pulling her coat tighter. You should lock up. Storm's not letting up. I nodded, watching her walk toward the door. My hand twitched, wanting to stop her, to say something reckless, but I didn't. At the doorway, she hesitated, one hand on the handle. You shouldn't look at me that way, she said quietly. I swallowed hard. How am I looking? She didn't answer, just gave the smallest, almost imperceptible smile, sad and knowing, before stepping out into the rain. The bell above the door chimed once, and then the storm swallowed her whole. That night, I stood at the window, watching the streetlights ripple across wet pavement. My reflection stared back, blurred, uncertain. Something had almost happened, and somehow, that felt more dangerous than if it had. It happened on a Sunday. The shop was closed, the air outside heavy with heat, and the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel too loud. She'd called earlier, said her radio had stopped working again. I could drop by, she offered, her voice softer than usual. Yeah, I said before I thought about what that meant. When she arrived, the sun was low, bleeding orange light across the windows. She wore jeans and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. Casual, but careful. The kind of careful that hides nerves. We sat across from each other at the workbench. The radio sat between us, silent. Neither of us seemed interested in fixing it. She watched me unscrew the back panel, her chin resting on her hand. "You always look so focused," she said quietly. "It's grounding." I smiled without looking up. "You make that sound like a rare thing." "It is," she murmured. "People your age." She stopped herself, shook her head. "Never mind." I glanced at her. "People my age what?" Her eyes met mine, steady but trembling at the edges. "They don't stay still long enough to listen." Something cracked open in the quiet between us. The hum of the ceiling fan, the faint tick of a wall clock, everything else faded. I could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. Without thinking, I said, "You don't have to keep pretending you're okay." Her mouth parted slightly. "I didn't think I was pretending." "You are," I said softly. "You do it every time you walk in here." The words hung in the air, heavy and uninvited. I expected her to shut down, to deflect. Instead, she looked away, blinking too fast. "My husband used to tell me that," she said, voice barely there. "That I make everything look fine even when it isn't." I didn't know what to say. There was a kind of nakedness in her tone that made the room feel smaller. "Does he still?" I asked. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "No." He stopped noticing long before he stopped talking. Silence again. Not the easy kind this time, the kind that presses against your chest. I reached for the radio, pretending to adjust a screw. My fingers trembled. "Maybe that's why you keep bringing things here," I said. "So something finally gets fixed." She stared at me for a long time. "Too long." "Maybe," she whispered. "But you shouldn't try to fix me, Liam. You'll only get lost in it." "I already am," I said before I could stop myself. Her breath caught. Just once. And then she stood abruptly, like movement was the only thing keeping her from unraveling. She took her bag, smoothed her shirt, and turned toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. The light caught the silver in her hair, the curve of her shoulder. "Whatever this is," she said quietly, "we can't keep pretending it's nothing." I didn't answer. Couldn't. She looked back once, eyes soft but tired. Sometimes silence says what we're too afraid to. And then she was gone, leaving the radio, the empty room, and the sound of her words echoing like static I couldn't tune out. She didn't come to the shop for almost a month after that Sunday. No messages. No broken things needing repair. Nothing. I told myself I didn't notice. That I was busy with classes, with life. But every time the bell over the door rang, I looked up a little too fast. When she finally returned, it was different. No small smile, no easy calm. Her eyes were swollen, like she hadn't slept. She carried a small cardboard box. "I need you to fix something," she said. Her voice was lower than usual, steady, but distant, like she'd rehearsed it. Inside the box was a camera. Old, film type, dust collecting inside the lens. I lifted it gently. "This looks like it was my husband's," she interrupted. "He passed away 3 years ago." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't know. I'd guessed something was fractured there, but because she said it without armor. Just there. "I found some undeveloped rolls," she went on. "I didn't think they'd matter, but I can't stop wondering what's on them." I nodded slowly, unsure if she wanted help fixing the camera or fixing something deeper. "I can clean it," I said. "But developing film, I know someone who can do that," she said quickly. "I just needed it to work again. Needed to touch it." She leaned closer, running her fingers over the scuffed surface of the camera, her hand shaking just enough for me to notice. I'd seen her composed, controlled, untouchable. This was the first time she looked like she might break. "I'm sorry," I said softly. She smiled faintly. "Don't be. You remind me of him sometimes." That sentence hit differently. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't even comforting. It was something between a confession and a wound. "How?" I asked. She hesitated. "The way you look at things, like you're trying to understand them, not fix them." I didn't know what to do with that. My chest felt too small for my breath. She traced the edge of the camera with her thumb. "He used to do that too. Look at me like I was something to figure out." Her voice broke, just once. "But he never said what he found." I reached out, almost instinctively, covering her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. The contact was brief, careful, but enough to steady her. Maybe he didn't have the words, I said quietly. She looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted in the air between us. Not attraction, not pity, just two people standing in the gravity of things they couldn't fix. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. Then maybe it's time I stopped waiting for them. Later, after she left, I noticed something in the box she'd forgotten. A folded photo tucked beneath the padding. It was her, younger, standing beside a man holding that same camera. The corner of the photo was worn, but in the man's reflection, blurred in the lens, he looked a little like me. I sat there for a long time, holding the photo, feeling something crack quietly open inside me. Whatever this was, it wasn't what I thought it was anymore. It was deeper and harder to walk away from. The photo stayed on my desk for a week before I could bring myself to return it. I wasn't sure what scared me more, how much he looked like me, or how much that meant to her. When she finally came back, it wasn't planned. She appeared in the doorway near closing time, soft light slanting behind her, a thin coat wrapped around her like armor she'd stopped believing in. "You kept it," she said, eyes flicking to the photograph lying beside the register. "I didn't mean to," I said. "I was going to give it back." She nodded slowly, stepping closer. "You were curious. I would have been too." There was no accusation in her tone, only a tired kind of honesty. She ran her fingers along the photo's edge, as though afraid it might vanish if she held it too tightly. "I forgot how young I was," she whispered. "It feels like a different life. Sometimes I think he'd hate who I became." "You became someone who survived?" I said. Her gaze lifted to mine, soft, searching. "And you? What are you becoming?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Maybe because everything I wanted to say, everything I shouldn't, was sitting right there between us, heavy and unspoken. Instead, I gestured to the stool beside the workbench. "Sit. The kettle's still warm." She did. The steam from the cups fogged the small window, turning the world outside into a blur of orange streetlights. For a long time, we said nothing. The quiet wasn't charged this time. It was gentle, worn in, like the ache that comes after tears you didn't cry. Finally, she spoke. "I keep thinking this shouldn't have happened. You and I know. And yet," she trailed off, the words folding into silence. I nodded. "And yet." Her hand was resting on the table, still, unguarded. I didn't reach for it at first. I just watched her thumb trace small circles on the wood, like she was trying to smooth out time itself. Then, without a word, I placed my hand over hers. Slowly, carefully. She didn't move, didn't pull away. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were wet, but not from sadness. More like recognition, the quiet realization that something had changed long before either of us named it. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "No," I said. "It doesn't." We both smiled, small, uncertain. The kind of smile that admits defeat to something bigger than reason. She leaned forward then, just slightly, until her forehead rested against mine. The contact was fragile, almost reverent, like we were both afraid to breathe. No words, no promises, just the soft hum of the clock on the wall and the warmth of her skin against mine. The world outside moved on, uncaring. But in that quiet, something inside both of us stilled, not ending, not beginning, just being. When she finally pulled back, she exhaled, steadying herself. "We'll have to find a way to live with this," she said softly. "I already am," I whispered. She smiled, barely, and for once, didn't look away. It's been almost a year since the last time I saw her. Funny how certain moments refuse to fade, no matter how much life piles on top of them. You move cities, change jobs, fill your days, but somewhere, beneath it all, a quiet part of you keeps replaying the same scene. For me, it's that night in the shop, the hum of the old clock, her forehead resting against mine, and the feeling that something had both ended and begun in the same breath. We didn't say goodbye. Not really. One day, she just stopped coming by, and I didn't chase her. I think we both knew that whatever existed between us wasn't meant to be held too tightly. Some things, if you try to define them, disappear. But I still think about her. Not in the way I used to, not with that restless wanting, but with a kind of quiet gratitude. Because she changed the way I see people, the way I listen. Before her, I was someone who fixed things because I was afraid of what couldn't be repaired. But she taught me that not everything broken needs mending. Some things just need to be seen, understood, allowed to exist as they are. Sometimes, when I pass an antique shop or hear the low crackle of an old radio, I think of her. I wonder if she ever fixed that camera, if she developed those photos. I wonder if she kept the one where he looked like me, or if she tucked it away again, where only memory can reach. I used to think love was supposed to be loud, something you claimed, something that claimed you back. But now I know it can be quieter than that. It can be a silence shared across a table, a touch that never turns into more, a truth that never needs to be spoken to feel real. I don't regret any of it. Not the confusion, not the ache, not the way I kept looking for her shadow in every reflection for months after. Because what we had, whatever it was, didn't vanish. It settled somewhere softer, like dust that never fully leaves the air. I think she would have liked that thought. Sometimes, I imagine her listening to that same radio again. Maybe in her kitchen, maybe with the window open. And when a familiar song comes on, she pauses, smiles faintly, and remembers too. Not the storm, not the silence, just the stillness that came after. And maybe, in some small, quiet way, that's love. If you've ever had someone who changed you, not with grand gestures, but with quiet understanding, you'll know what I mean. Tell me in the comments, what's the one moment you still replay, even when you swear you've moved on?